Good day, everybody. My name is Dennis Collier, and welcome to the second conversation in this series about developing football athletes. And today's conversation is not just about developing any old athlete. We're going to talk about developing the athletes that are called to play the most difficult position in all of sports. That is the quarterback. It really is one of these classic age-old debates in sports. What is the hardest position to play? But to my mind, it really is no debate. It is the quarterback in football. If you look at some of the other candidates that get thrown out there sometimes, like, for example, the pitcher in baseball. Important, no doubt. But here's the thing. No matter what your pitcher is doing, whether he's really, really good or really, really terrible, it doesn't affect the offensive side of the game, really. You always get your turn to bat. The other comparable that often gets thrown out there in this debate is the goaltender in hockey or soccer. But the same argument kind of applies there. No doubt they're both very, very influential on the outcome of the game in those sports. But the goaltender doesn't directly influence his teammates in the same way a quarterback influences his or hers. But this position of quarterback, there's really nothing like it in sports where your teammates that are on the field with you at the same time are so completely dependent upon what you are doing at this position, whether it be good or whether it be bad. And if it is the latter, if the quarterback is too bad, that does influence his defensive teammates as well, because now they're on the field too much. The bottom line is there is nothing like it in all of sports, playing quarterback, a position that combines incredible physical skills with equally incredible mental skills, plus on top of that, the pressure of having so much of the outcome of the game dependent upon your play. Considering all that, we had better find someone with some pretty impressive credentials to talk about quarterback development. And I consider myself very lucky to have found such a person. While he was in university, Andrew Buckley's play at the quarterback position was so good that he not once but twice was named the best football player in all of Canadian university. And nobody ever, hardly ever, does it happen that you win the Heck Creighton Award twice. All the while, by the way, enhancing his understanding of sports science by earning a degree in kinesiology. And then after his university career, Andrew went on to play a couple of seasons of pro football as a quarterback in the CFL and become a doctor specializing in sports medicine. I mean, could we really hope to have a better guest to talk about this topic here today? Okay, I've talked enough. Last thing before we start, let's hear the official bio of Dr. Andrew Buckley with some cool action photos set to an even cooler rock and roll song.
Dr. Andrew Buckley's life has combined athletic and academic excellence. He was a two-time winner of the Heck Creighton Award as the most outstanding player in Canadian university football. He became the first player in history to win this award while also being named a top 8 academic All-Canadian. After his university career, Andrew played 2 seasons in the CFL for the Calgary Stampeders. In 2023, he was inducted into the Alberta Sports Hall of Fame. Today, he is a sport and exercise medicine physician after graduating from the University of Calgary's School of Medicine.
Andrew Buckley, please tell us where you were born and raised.
Born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, and I haven't lived too far away from there my entire life, so I've been lucky to be raised out west and raised on a family farm just west of the city, and now I just live in Canmore, Alberta.
Andrew, why football?
Good question. I think when I was getting going playing football, it started because it was basically I watched my dad grow up and play it. And then the beauty of the game that I found was that, whether you were big, small, skinny, bigger kid, like there was a place for everyone playing football, and I thought that was such a cool game that it was inclusive of everyone. Fast, slow, whether you're able to jump or catch, like anyone could play the game and you could find a spot on the team. And kind of over the years of playing, particularly starting as a 10-year-old, being able to see these different abilities and body types always be included over a 10-year span playing with the same community team, it turned into a pretty cool just an appreciation for that sort of part of the game, I guess.
And Andrew, you had an awesome ride in the game of football. And the way I see it unfolding, Andrew, if this is cool with you, the interview will take two parts. First, we'll talk about specifically quarterbacks. And then we'll talk about your other claim to fame, medicine. So that could be my third question for you, actually, Andrew. Do you know off the top of your head, are you the only living human being that has scored a touchdown in the Grey Cup and also have a medical degree?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. I think the numbers are probably low, if at all. I could probably count them on one hand if there is other people.
You're one of a kind, I think. All right, so let's start the first part, Andrew. We'll talk about football development, and as best as we can, I'm going to try to tailor it to quarterback play, using your trajectory, your story as kind of a template for that. And along the way, maybe you could point out things that worked for you, things that, with your wisdom today, you might say that was a good idea, or maybe some things you might have done differently. But we'll use your story as
Sure.
our template here. So let's start right from the beginning. How old, Andrew, are you when you start football, and specifically when you start quarterbacking?
I think so. My first year of football would have been 2004, which would have put me at 11 years old, and then I started quarterbacking when I was 12. So my second season playing football.
Man, that quarterback position, Andrew, it has so much pressure both ways. All the other guys on offense, they're not going to have success if the one guy under center can't deliver. And then likewise, if the quarterback is inefficient, the defense is going to be on the field too much, and they're going to be compromised because of that. So because this position is so unbelievably intricate and difficult and important in the outcome of the game, you starting as an 11-year-old, how did you manage all that, man?
Yeah, no, it's a great, I guess, debate that gets brought up is what is the hardest position in sports, and I think quarterback is one that should be up there. I think starting as a youngster, it's a bit of this series of like graduated responsibility where you start at an age where, at 11 or 12 years old when I was playing quarterback, like you can't throw really far. Your ability to control the offense, it's not as good as, someone like a running back at that age. And so you start at this position where it's like, okay, maybe I'm going to dink and dunk a few 5-yard passes here and there because that's all you can do. And so at that age, I think it's really the running back and the offensive line that are kind of the key players. But as you develop this ability and skill with time and age and getting strength, all of a sudden it sort of starts opening up the world. And then with that, you open up the responsibilities of that. And so, once you can throw a 20-yard pass, all of a sudden the coach starts putting that in the playbook and you start to be able to just, essentially hold more weight within the offense. And I think my first couple of seasons of football when I was playing at 12 years old there, I remember playing quarterback and I hated it because it felt like all I did was hand off the ball. And I was like, what am I doing here? I feel like, you're not necessarily in a game-changing role, but then as you stick with it and you start growing the arm strength, it's like, hey, coach put in a play for this. And as I got faster, coach put in a quarterback draw, things like that. So all of that time and repetition does start to develop that ability to, I guess, realize your importance in the weight that you hold in the offense.
That's interesting. And my next question, Andrew, is going to be, for coaches who are deciding which kid to make the quarterback, the other question that often comes up is, is the best overall athlete the quarterback? And we're speaking at young kids now, or at least is he one of the best athletes on the team? Are you suggesting maybe that at the very earliest ages of football, like 10 and 11, maybe it's not the best athlete who is the QB at that age level?
I think it was a combination of factors for me. Like, really on our team, I would not have been, in the top 5 best athletes. But I think
you wouldn't have been top
back,
5 when you're really?
No. When I started off, I was really small. I was slow, and I could catch the ball. I could throw a little bit. Like, I had some basic fundamentals. but I think it was a bit more of the demeanor where it was like, okay, I was, calm. I could handle a bit more of the like mental workload behind things. And I wasn't necessarily the guy at that age that they wanted running the ball 10 or 20 times a game. It was sort of, in a way, a bit of a safe position for me where, okay, I can hand off the ball 30 or 40 times a game. I know all my plays. I can help my teammates with the plays. And then when there was a, 5-yard out pass or a slant route that I could throw 10 yards downfield, yeah, they'd mix those in. But certainly I think for me, it was a bit more the fact that like I could handle the capacity of the offensive scheme. And then, when you have a lineman looking at you in the huddle, like, oh, what do I do on this play? You can say, hey, you're blocking to the left sort of thing, and kind of direct them that way.
So the things you mentioned there are more, let's call it mental or intellectual, with this dash of leadership thrown in.
Yeah. And I think, having had the chance to coach younger kids now, you can see that early, who has it and who doesn't. And, after your first exhibition game, you can see kind of who is going to be able to handle the fire or like the pressure under center in there. And not necessarily to be the guy making the plays, but to be the one that's calm and can help their teammates in those situations. And I think the last thing you want is someone there that's just going to, the minute you touch the ball, kind of panic and abort the plan and things like that. So I think that came out early when I was a young kid.
Let me just jump ahead a little bit here, but still on the topic, Andrew, of the role of athleticism in playing the QB position. And I'm going to say jump ahead because if you look at some of the best quarterbacks in the world today, the Josh Allens of the world or the Lamar Jacksons of the world, like these guys are unbelievable athletes. But I guess to your point, you could also pick out a lot of quarterbacks over the years that were not the greatest physical specimens. Tom Brady, for maybe the best example,
yeah,
who had other aspects that you refer to, which we'll call mental aspects. Do you think there's any advantage? We're talking again about the younger ages here, Andrew. If the goal was, although it would be a bizarre goal perhaps, to have as a 10-year-old, the goal being developed into a world-class quarterback, but if that was the goal, would there be any advantage, do you think, in having him play other positions in these younger ages of football?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. Like, I think I really believe in sort of the multi-sport background to developing athleticism. I think within that, if you're playing different positions, you understand the game better. And I think, at least in my development, one of the best things I ever did was, like, the way our youth football worked was that, you'd play kind of 2 years per age group. And so, as a first-year guy on the team, you were one of the smaller guys, and then you'd graduate and be a second-year guy on the team. So when I was one of the younger kids on each age level, I would play receiver, because there was a guy who was the age above me that was playing quarterback. And then when he graduated, I would move up to quarterback. And I think that allowed me to understand the game from a receiver perspective. So it says, okay, I know now where I want my receivers. I know how to run my routes to get open. And then that translates as a quarterback is that you can read the body language and say, okay, my receiver's going to do this at this point. So I think, whether you're playing that or defensive back or running back, you just see the game differently. And, in the same way when you have like point guards transition to play receiver, like they see the game differently. And it usually is advantageous because it blends skills that others don't have.
Blending skills that you might not otherwise have. And you mentioned a key term for me, one of my most interesting topics, the idea of multi-sport, Andrew.
Yeah.
So elaborate on that, please. When you're 10, you start playing football, but how much did other sports play a role in your childhood?
Yeah, I think it was huge. Like, as a kid, I was sort of the one who was maybe hard to wrangle, and I was just always energetic and couldn't sit still sort of thing. So I grew up doing a lot of running, a lot of soccer. I was actually quite involved in skateboarding, believe it or not. I played basketball, track and field. I was at one point a Southern Alberta badminton champion in doubles badminton, and I think all of those are just...
Did not know that.
Yeah, they bring, different skills to what you can do as a quarterback. And so, like, I'm a huge proponent of that. And unfortunately, you see them kind of moving away from that direction, like particularly down in the States when it's like there's such this pressure to specialize so young. And I think it's bad for a couple of reasons, in that you kind of starve the kids of the ability to play multiple sports and find a passion. But I also believe that, I think even the evidence will show that athletes become stronger when they're able to do multiple sports. And maybe just anecdotally, like, played with a lot of teammates over the years, and it seemed like the guys that had the most like physical athleticism were those that did gymnastics as a kid, where they were strong and coordinated and able to control their body in space. And there's a few guys that stick out that they could just start tumbling down the field and doing backflips and spins, and it's like, oh man, like there's absolutely going to be translation to a high level in football with any sort of thing like that.
Andrew, that's so hilarious, man. You brought up literally gymnastics. I got two good stories about that. I did an interview with your fellow Calgarian, by the way. Not going to be released until the 2026. Kyle Schufelt, Canada's only Olympic.
No way. A legend.
Yeah. And I said to him, and it's not because I'm trying to kiss his butt, but I said it to him, and I'll say it again because I think it's something I believe in. If, Andrew, your goal was to develop an elite level quarterback or anything, name the athlete, the one sport that I would personally pick to start off kids with is gymnastics.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I said that to my wife here. Is we're going to put our kids in gymnastics for the first 3 or 4 years, just to build that athletic base, and you just teaching them to somersault and flip and jump and climb. It's like all of that is the stuff that we kind of just don't have enough of as kids. So I think it's the perfect sport for it.
There's no other sport like it. And my second story on gymnastics, I won't name names, but the best player on my son's high school football team last year, when he celebrated a touchdown, he would occasionally, Andrew, perform a backflip. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, actually, if this kid was taught gymnastics. I don't think he was, and if you're listening and you're out there, and I do apologize if you have a lengthy background in gymnastics, but whether he did or he didn't, it just speaks to the role of being a great athlete. The fact that you can do a backflip, and I said to my son, Dan, can you do that? Not a chance.
Yeah.
You just can't do it. But this kid can, and not coincidentally, he's also the best player on the team.
Yeah, well, and I can echo that. Like, I've seen that on a few of my teams, where it's like the guys that are scoring the touchdowns are the ones that can do that, because it's, correlation, causation, who knows, but it does not hurt. So I couldn't agree more.
All right, let's move down your trajectory here. And in fact, let's go all the way up, Andrew, to university football, University of Calgary. I'd like you to tell some stories here. The first time you arrive at the university, and you tell the story from the time you arrive there to the time that you become QB1. Was it the first year, Andrew? Was it you tell the story?
Yeah, it's a bit of a rocky road, actually, and that my football career almost came to an end because of that. But I basically, when I graduated high school, I went to I went to a really small school. So we had a football team for about 3 years before I started, and so we were in the smallest division in the city. We had no recruiting power because the coaches want to see the kids coming out of the big 4A, 5A size schools. And this was just a little private school that we played the little small towns around Calgary, so no recruiting. And I basically had gone to these summer camps at the University of Calgary, and I had gone a couple of successive summers and had met the quarterback coach there, who ended up becoming my quarterback coach for about a decade after that. But he kind of lobbied in my corner and got me sitting in front of our head coach at the time, Blake Nill. And eventually I signed a letter of intent to go to University of Calgary, and I show up at the first training camp. And I'm one of 8 quarterbacks in the training camp. And on day one, I'm listed as 8 of 8 on the bottom of the depth chart. So I knew it was going to be a bit of an uphill climb. Yeah. So I made it through the first training camp, and I think I worked a few spots up after that. And I was coming in behind a guy who he was, when I went into my first year, he was just going into his second year. So he then had basically 4 more years to play before he graduated. And I was thinking, man, it's going to be a long 4 years sitting on the bench behind this guy. And he had just won the National Rookie of the Year at the time. So I knew he was good and he had lots of potential. And it's like, as a coach, how are you going to ever play a guy that, comes from a tiny little school above the guy who was just the Rookie of the Year in all of Canada. So a good ball player. But go to my first training camp. I think I end up second on the depth chart starting the first year season, and I spent the whole season as backup. And thankfully, we had a good team, so we blew out a lot of games, and I was able to get in the fourth quarter and just get some experience. So did that the first year. Same thing for the second year. I was backup quarterback my second year and kind of just rode the bench, got in at the end of the games, and was just learning as much as I could. And it was kind of by the end of the second year that, in my head, I said, man, I'm putting in more work than the guy who's the starter. I feel like I'm building skills faster than him. I'm able to handle the offense in the same way, but I just felt like I was never going to get a look because he had this National Rookie of the Year. And the next year he was, I think, runner-up for the Player of the Year for the Heck Crichton Trophy. So I was thinking, I'm just never going to play. And so then I said, well, going into my third year, like if I don't at least get some sort of, nudge in the right direction that I might get a bit more playing time, I was thinking I might just call it quit. And it was like some divine act of fate, but in that first game, the starter broke his foot, and then I stepped in and never looked back, and it was like, wow. Yeah, I still look back now and think about what a strange, coincidence or happenstance that was, but he broke his foot.
It's a story, Andrew, that's happened more than once in the history of sports.
Yeah.
So when you're the starter, draw the timeline for me. There's a Vanier Cup appearance in here somewhere.
That's right. Yeah, well, and that was the first year starting. So after I stepped in game number 1 of that 2013 season, we went the whole season after that undefeated and went to the Vanier Cup with, at that time, we were the youngest team in the country by age, apart from Carleton, who was their first year of the program. And it was just sort of this, felt like a bit of a miracle team that we just kept piecing together these wins and, beating teams that we had no business beating. And we ended up in the Vanier Cup against Laval. And just
who were a juggernaut.
Exactly, yeah. I had a hell of a fight with them, and we were winning up until the third quarter, hanging on as long as we could, and eventually just, the dam broke. But it was an amazing game, a crazy experience where you're playing in front of 20,000, 25,000 people that are all, boozed up and screaming as loud as they could. Yeah. And it was like, even to this day, I haven't played in CFL games that are as loud as that. And it was like, it was incredible.
I did not know. You guys were winning that game in the third quarter, you said?
Yeah. We had taken the lead with a touchdown with like maybe 4 minutes left in the third quarter. And then like we were doing everything we could to hang on. Like we had some of our offensive linemen playing defensive line just because they were bullying us on the D linemen. So it was like, we just couldn't hang on, and they eventually just kind of their momentum picked up, and we couldn't do enough. But we were as close as we could have been.
Wow, that's a great story. All right, up to the Vanier Cup defeat. Let's go back to that 10-year-old kid who first started playing quarterback. If you were to put into perspective, Andrew, what is different mentally at this point in time? What are the things you've learned up to this point in time that would enable you to be the one of the quarterbacks in the Vanier Cup?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think probably the biggest thing is just responding to success and failure. Like, as a young kid, it's sort of like, you just roll with the punches and kind of, happy-go-lucky. If things are good, things are great. And when you're in the position, though, where it's like all of a sudden you have people who, are coaches, their jobs are on the line depending on how well you do. And so it's like there's bigger things at stake, or if you're completing 60% of the passes, things are great. But if all of a sudden you're throwing 4 picks a game and the coach's head is on the line, like there's just more pressure there. And so understanding that when you do throw an interception, or you have a fumble, or you make a bad decision and have a bad game, is like how to mentally approach that in the moment, so that you can respond in the third and fourth quarters and still rally for the game. But then also going into the next week, how you have to mentally prepare so that you don't start the next week off, in a bad headspace, or as feeling nervous, or not having the confidence to go out there and lead your team. And I think it was obviously a lot of experiences with, at times you go out there and you absolutely blow up and embarrass yourself in front of your friends, but it's learning from those moments that then if you show that you can respond and rebound even the next game, it's like it gives your teammates and your coaches the belief in you that no matter what the circumstance, you're going to be able to go out there and rally as best you can. So a bit of just learning how to take those punches but then come back stronger, which I think it takes failure to be able to do that.
Andrew, I think you've explained stuff that applies to quarterbacking and life in general. So that's a great answer, I think. Let's keep investigating here at this point. You've talked a lot about the mental stuff, but let's talk about some of the physical stuff,
Yeah.
off-field training. Because clearly, maybe when you were 10, you weren't. That wasn't a big component of your life. But now that
No.
by third year university, oh, am I wrong? Were you doing stuff when you were 10 too?
Well, I mean, little interjection, but I had a football coach who was a bit of a crazy old coach on my first football team that he would just make us do push-ups and push-ups. And I remember, I think that was the strongest I'd ever been doing push-ups at about age 12. And I could do 60 push-ups in 60 seconds when I was 12 or 13. And since then, I've been
Wow.
steadily downhill, but that's an aside.
Okay, so third year university, in general, this is a big, broad question, I know. Talk about some of the kind of off-field training that you thought was beneficial to you being the best quarterback you could possibly be at this point in time. So end of the third year of university.
At that point in time, it was really about just getting bigger and faster. And I feel like when you come into university, coming out of high school, compared to when you finish university, like in a young man's life anyways, that's a huge time for growth where, you look at the high school kids and they're 20, 30 pounds lighter than the kids graduating university. And it's just, that's when young men seem to put on, some height and even some mass. And like when I first started in university, I think I walked in at about 178 pounds and, 5'11", and then I finished at maybe 6'1" and 205. So ended up putting on close to 25 or 30 pounds. And really that's what I needed to do to become competitive and someone that can actually, take over a game with physical ability.
Sure.
And all that was, like, we had a tremendous strength and conditioning program with the University of Calgary, and one that, rivals or is even better than many pro teams. And it was like 4 days a week we were, essentially in the gym at the Olympic Oval there. And so we would lift weights for an hour and a half, we'd run on the track for an hour and a half. And I think that's really what pulled us to becoming one of the, the more dominant programs for so long, was that we just had invested so much time and effort in our strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
And it was cool to see guys, they come in as these spindly little first years, and by the end of their fifth year, they're, rocked up and big and strong and fast. And to play and succeed at that level, you need to be that way. And, certain positions as a quarterback, you don't necessarily have to be that way. But my mindset was that, well, if, I can stand in the pocket and pass, I don't need any muscles to do that. But the minute I take off and I start running, it's like, I want to be strong enough I can outrun people. I want to be physical enough I can put my shoulder down and, carry the ball 5 or 10 times a game and not get hurt. So it was really all that off-season weight training that did it for me.
That's great. And I'm going to assume nutrition.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a huge component, and I think one that would set apart some people from others, and that, unfortunately with our University of Calgary, and any university really, like, you've got the first year kids coming in and they're on the meal card at the dining center, and so they put a lot of garbage into the system, and sort of garbage in, garbage out. And I was lucky that I lived at home for those 5 years, and so I'd come home, I'd have 3 good meals a day, and it was, mom's healthy cooking. And I think it does help. And I've always been someone that's kind of nutrition minded, and even now it's like really working hard to keep a lean, balanced diet. And the battle at that point was because you're expending so many calories. It's just like, how do I get enough good calories in? Not as much of a struggle for me, but then you see the guys that they're an offensive lineman that come in at 210 pounds, and coach says, hey, you're not going to hit the field until you're 280. And so they've got 70 pounds to go over the course of a couple of years. And for them, it really is like, eating as much as you physically can to just bulk up to a size where you can do your job. So it's a tough part of the game in that sense, and something that I think is a bit maybe underappreciated in the development of linemen at that age, is that it's tough to get big for guys that are, maybe have the frame size, but it's just not natural for them. But anyways,
Well, you mentioned, the thing you mentioned, Andrew, at the beginning about how football, and you're 100% right, no matter what size you are, we can find something for you to do here.
Yeah.
But that position in particular, man, like there's a bar that you've got to be a very, very large human being to play that position. So you're saying you've seen guys who really struggle to gain weight to play that position.
Yeah, exactly. And you can go in there as an undersized player if you're, fast and have the skill and can do it. But, largely there is almost a bare minimum for what you have to weigh and how big you have to be in order to be successful. And, you know, I can think of just a handful of guys that were the undersized that had success. There's guys that one of them I can think of. So he's actually a former high school teammate of mine. His name's Mike Clausen. And he was about 6'5", graduating grade 12, but maybe like 190 pounds. So just a beanpole. But because he had that physical frame, our university coach saw him and said, "Man, you've got potential if we can get you big." And over the course of his 5 years, he put on 100 pounds, and he kept his athleticism from being a smaller, lean guy. And then he ended up playing, 8 or 10 years in the pros because he just had such a good physical body for it, but then also had all the skills from being one of the smaller guys that just had to thrive that way. So it's cool to see how those guys take off, and there is a place for them as long as they can keep up with the weight.
Yeah. That's a great story. All right, we could talk all day about off-field training and nutrition. Let's jump ahead. Season 4. Now we're getting into, Andrew, what we'll call the Heck Crichton years. So your 4th year is when you're the best player in Canadian university football. Let's talk about this year, and from a quarterback's point of view, Andrew, what comes together for you now in this 4th year where you're no longer just like, I'm doing pretty good here at the University of Calgary. I'm the best football player in university in this country.
I think it was a combination of finally getting some reps with the starting offense in game situations. And it had been 4 years now at that point that I'd been working and understanding the offensive system. And so I felt like mentally I could really take charge and see exactly what the coach was thinking when he called a play. So I understood the intent of the offense in every play that was called. And then physically, I had 4 years at that point. I'd probably put on 20 or 25 pounds. I'd gotten faster and bigger and more physically equal to the senior guys on the field. And really, I guess just a combination of being, okay, I'm finally physically ready. Mentally, I understand the picture of what's going on here. And then, I don't know what clicked in my head, but all of a sudden there was something that happened that said, geez, I can take over a game and I can play here and I can actually make a big impact instead of just being the quarterback that's kind of just, okay, I just need to distribute and get the ball out of my hands. It's now like I want the ball in my hands when the game's on the line, because I felt like I was going to be the one to make the difference. So a lot of factors, I guess.
You mentioned a bunch of things there. I'm curious if someone put you on the spot, because you mentioned the physical there too, Andrew.
Yeah.
You're bigger and faster, even, you said. If someone put you on the spot and said, which of the two is the more important, the physical stuff or the mental stuff, would you be able to pinpoint?
Oh, that is tough. I think probably the mental stuff, particularly for the quarterback position. I think you could get away without being physical. But I think as a part of my game and what made me one of the best was that, mentally I could distribute the ball and get the ball where it needed to be, but then physically, I probably ran the ball and I had more touchdowns than any quarterback in the country, and I was actually, carrying the ball as a playmaker a little bit too. So I think in general, probably mental, but for my game, I think the physical probably.
It's so, you really can't diminish either. But I think, Andrew, people might be inclined to diminish the physical.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example of what I'm talking about. I mentioned how to play the line, clearly everyone realizes, as I call it, there's a bar. There's a cutoff where if you're not this big, we'll try to find something else for you to do, but you can't play the line unless you're this big. And you and I have talked about how the quarterback is such an intellectual position. But there's physical components of this position too, Andrew. And the best example that I love to cite about this, a guy I mentioned earlier, Tom Brady, who people sometimes, Andrew, they like to say, he had no physical skills, his combine was terrible, or whatever, whatever stuff they used to describe how Tom Brady wasn't a physical specimen. Yeah. But here's the thing about Tom Brady. He's 6'4". And if Tom Brady is my height, which is an average heighted male in North America. If Tom Brady is 5'9", Andrew, I don't think we know who Tom Brady is.
I
So even at the
couldn't agree
QB
more.
position, I think there's some physical, let's call them necessities.
Yeah.
There's no pencil neck geeks playing QB, Andrew. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. It's a position that you can probably get away with having fewer attributes, but like you say, there's a bare minimum that you need to hit to be able to get there. And Tom Brady's the perfect example. If he's 6'2", yeah, maybe, but it's no guarantee. And if he's 6'2", he's going to have to be a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, maybe run the ball a little bit more. And I don't think that was a part of his game. And so, for him, the fact that he had it all up here, but he was 6'5", even being as slow as he was, I think that's what it took.
Yeah. I think I looked it up recently, but not that recently. The last time I looked it up, the number of QBs in the NFL, Andrew, that are under 6 feet tall, of all the start, there's like two maybe, I think, of all the starters in the NFL that are under 6 feet, and they're of course like 5'11", 5'10".
Yeah.
So anyway, I do like how you don't you don't dismiss. There's two things happening here. Clearly, you got to have the mind to be a quarterback, but there's a physical component of this position as well. Let's keep going forward here. In fact, we'll briefly skip over your second Heck Crichton. Is that okay? We probably shouldn't do that. Very
That's
few
okay.
people in history have won two Heck Crichtons back to back. Because I'm just trying to get to your CFL stuff, Andrew. But just for the sake to complete the story, talk about your fifth and final year at the University of Calgary when you won the Heck Crichton for a second time, and maybe what do you keep learning along the way of being a great quarterback? Your final year at the university and your second back-to-back Heck Crichton.
Yeah, so that year was a bit different because in between my fourth and fifth season, we had a coaching change. So we lost the head coach, we lost our offensive coordinator, and we had a new offensive coordinator come in with a totally different system, new head coach, and it was a bit of turmoil there because here you are going into your last year, and you're like, I'm as comfortable as I can be with the offense. But the guy that was brought in, Ryan Sheehan, came in from Queen's University. And he brought a system that was really much more like a pro-style system. And so there was definitely some bumps in the road. And it was a bit rocky as far as like, are we going to have any success or, are we not? But it turned out that the system and, his way of coaching really brought out the best in me because it pushed me mentally to become a smarter quarterback. And then it was kind of the culmination of like, 5 years stronger, this new system that I was really starting to click with and a coach that I got along well with. And that year really felt like it was like, give me the ball, we're taking over this game, let's go. And it felt like things were ready. And every time we started a game, it felt like there was no doubt that we would have the ball and be able to win it. So yeah, it was.
I didn't know that part of your story either, but now that you mention it, I'm going to put you on the spot again. And I'm going to ask for your input to the age-old question, whatever insight you might have. Quarterback and coach. Which of the two is more important? And some examples as you're thinking about it there. Well, obviously, again, Brady and Belichick is the famous question. Was it Brady or was it Belichick? But there's been many of these over, like Bill Walsh and Joe Montana. They had a great synergy. The guy in San Francisco today, Brock Purdy, who they say he was drafted last overall, I think, and some people are suggesting he's benefiting from the system that he's in, and maybe he's not that great of a quarterback. So on that very controversial topic, Andrew, what do you have to say? The whole notion of, is it the QB or is it the system?
I mean, I think having been on both sides of it, I think the quarterback probably has more ability to change the game than the coach does. And certainly there's a coach that can ruin a quarterback, but at the end of the day, if you're starting with someone without the basic scaffolding to carry the team, you're going to do nothing. And the Tom Brady example, like the fact that he went to Tampa Bay and won it, a year or two later, it's pretty good proof. But I think ultimately for the highest level of success, you're going to need both. And I guess the example, another one I'll bring up is that after my time playing, I got into coaching, and I was one of the quarterback coaches with the University of Calgary Dinos. And the quarterback that I was coaching at that time, he actually ended up winning the Heck Crichton. And it was kind of a good case study in my brain to look at and say, well, was this more him or was it more me as a coach? And I can say, well, He was pretty damn good, and I don't know how much I changed that because I did little bits and pieces to try to put him in the right position. And, he had the same head coach that I did that when I won the Heck Crichton in my 5th year, but he was, whether he was with us or some other school, I think had a pretty good chance to take that.
So your answer, it was more him. That was your answer.
Exactly. Yeah. I wish I could take credit for that one.
You deserve some credit for sure. All right, let's keep flying along here. We got to talk about pro football, Andrew. Why don't you just tell us a story, because it's a great story as well, from the time your career at the University of Calgary ends to getting the call from the hometown team again, the Calgary Stampeders, to come to try out for their team. To talk about the whole process of that.
Yeah, so I got pretty lucky because right when I was kind of going into my 4th or 5th year, they started doing a program in the CFL that was sort of like a quarterback internship where they were trying to get more Canadian quarterbacks involved in the CFL game, because that had just been, kind of a knock against the CFL for a lot of years, is that, where are the Canadian quarterbacks? So every year they'd bring in a Canadian university kid into their training camp, more just, as a spare arm to throw. And the first time I did that, I think was going into the 2014 year. And, by the end of the camp, I was starting to get reps with the actual offensive team, and I was starting to throw in one-on-ones, and they were saying, this kid seems to be able to hang with some of these guys. And so I think that was kind of the first foot in the door for me with the CFL, and then went back, played my 4th year, had a good year, won the Heck Crichton, and then was preparing. I knew the draft was there. I knew as a Canadian quarterback, I was thinking, well, there hasn't been a Canadian quarterback drafted for a decade. It's probably not going to be me. But I got strong. I went to the combine thinking maybe I'll have a chance to get picked up as a free agent. Went to the draft night to support a bunch of my teammates that were getting drafted, and I think we had 7 of my teammates get drafted. And we're kind of the numbers ticking down, and I'm just waiting to hopefully get a call after the draft ends as, hey, we'd like you in camp as a free agent. And sure enough, then I see my name on the ticker as the last pick in the draft, and I was thinking, no way. So it was, a pretty cool circumstance that I was one of the first Canadian quarterbacks drafted in about 10 years, which then got my foot in the door for a training camp and let me try out.
That's an interesting tidbit there too, maybe, Andrew, to elaborate on. How come? So if you're the Heck Crichton winner, how come you explain why other teammates and other people are getting drafted, but not you?
It's largely with the positional part of the CFL where there's a ratio for the number of Canadians that they need on the field at a time, and the CFL is classic where you'll have Canadian offensive linemen, you'll have some defensive linemen, a couple of special teamers. So they tend to draft the people that can fill those roles. And as a quarterback, the mindset was that, hey, we don't have enough quarterback development in the youth football and in the university football in Canada to have Canadian kids that can step into the kind of the mental rigors of the professional game into the quarterback position. And so they just said, well, we've tried it, it's failed in the past, why bother wasting a draft pick? So that was, I think, the mindset at the time.
At the time. It's changing a little bit nowadays, eh? Guys like Nathan Rourke and Trey Ford.
Yeah, exactly. I think slowly starting to turn the tides. And, I think a guy like Brad Sinopoli, he was probably drafted about 6 to 10 years ahead of me to the Stampeders. And he had a great career, but right away they switched him to receiver because he was a big, tall, fast guy that just, they said, well, you're going to have more impact in the game as a receiver. And I think maybe that showed that, hey, he's a smart guy. He understood the offense. He was kind of a role player that could fit in the offense. And then, I was lucky enough to get the shot and maybe open the door a little bit. And I think maybe a bit of untapped potential in my CFL career, but then you see guys like Nathan Rourke, who a Canadian kid, went down and played for the States and had kind of the American training through the NCAA, and then Trey Ford with Edmonton now, who's proving that he can manage a game and handle it as a starter. And so I think it is opening it up. And even this year there was the kid from Windsor, I believe, Taylor Algersma, who is down in the States and made it through an NFL training camp. So I think it's starting.
Yeah. Okay. Take us behind the scenes, training camp for the Stampeders, your first training camp. What is your mindset going in, Andrew? Are you thinking you're going to be on this team? Just take us through the whole process of showing up this is professional football now.
Yeah, I guess a little bit different for me going in, because the way it works, you get drafted in your fourth year of university football. And so my mindset that year was that I'm going to go to training camp, get the experience, and then go back and play my fifth year with the University of Calgary Dinos. And so really at that point, it was like, I don't intend to make this team. I'm just here to learn. But it came to a point where I was doing well enough that the coach actually asked me, like, hey, like, you got a shot to make the team. Like, do you want to push for it, or are you going to go back and play your fifth year? And I said, no, I'm going to go play my fifth year. But that gave me a lot of confidence to say, hey, let's make a push for this next year.
Andrew, how close were you? That's a cool thing to think about too. Like he says this to you. Were you close to saying, okay, I won't go back for the fifth year, or was that? Where was your mind in that department?
I think my heart was with the Dinos, because it felt like I had too much unfinished business there. So it was going to be hard to overcome that, to think about, going for a third string position with the Stampeders. And I was like, I feel like development wise too, I will probably get more from playing a season as the starter than I will from sitting on the bench and maybe doing some quarterback sneaks here and there. And so my heart was definitely back playing with the Dinos, but it was a tough choice because there hadn't been a Canadian quarterback on a roster for a long time.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the 2 years you ultimately do wind up playing for the Stampeders, especially 2016. Because again, just by chance, you find yourself, Andrew, in the Grey Cup that year.
Yeah.
Talk about your role on that team.
So that year I came in, I made the roster, and I was the third string quarterback. So there was Bo Levi Mitchell and a guy named Drew Tate, who were the two ahead of me. But historically in the Stamps offense, it's that third string guy that does all of the short yardage. And so, when it's 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1, or you're down on the goal line, they put in the short yardage quarterback, and you're doing quarterback sneaks, you're doing handoffs, and kind of running the short yardage offense. So that was basically my role, was go in there, take the snap, and dive headfirst into a pile of people that want to hurt you, and really just trying to inch away 1 yard at a time, which it was kind of a fun role. But I'm glad that they had the role to keep me involved and give me a job and some purpose on that team. And
that role leads to a touchdown in the 2016 Grey Cup. First time in God knows how many years, it was the 60s, I think.
Yeah.
But so tell us that story, Andrew. When they called you in, I think it was 1 yard away, I think, from the goal line. Tell us the story.
Well, so it was, we've been playing this game. We're kind of going back and forth, and actually ended up getting down quite a bit to Ottawa. And most of the time through the course of these games, as a short yardage quarterback, I would have gone in, 3 or 4 times through the course of the game. And it's kind of a good way to stay involved, stay warm. And at this point, it's like first half goes by, I haven't gotten in once. Second half's starting to chew by, and we're kind of the end of the third quarter, I want to say, end of the third or start of the fourth quarter. And so I'm cold and on the sidelines, haven't done a heck of a lot. And then we start inching towards the goal line, and then we get to a 2nd and 1 on the goal line, and they call my number, and it's sort of like, your stomach sort of bounces all around in your body, and you're this mix of nerves and excitement, and it's just like the only thing you can think about is just like, don't mess this up, like this is your chance. And so it was, it was really cool to have the coaches have the confidence in me to call the play. And then it was a wide sneak around the outside, and we kind of seal blocked the end, and then the rest is history. Away I go around the outside and score the touchdown, which was highlight of my life.
That's fantastic. All right, let's see what else we can extract from this, from life lessons and quarterback lessons. From a point of view of mentally, what kind of strategies might you suggest to help someone go from, the man at the University of Calgary, Heck Crichton winner ×2, to the backup? What's the mental adjustment you have to make to fit into that role, Andrew?
Yeah, no, it is tough. Like, you're used to taking every snap in practice, and you're used to getting all of the questions in film, and kind of the attention is on you for your growth. And so, I think the shift for me and the big learning point was that you have to be able to learn from the peripheries, and you've always got to be paying attention. You got to be ready. You got to be warm. You got to be mentally sound, so that when your time is called, you'll be able to have the success. And I think for me to be able to, in that first year, kind of watch how Bo Levi did it and how Drew Tate did it, and to still be learning, even though I wasn't the guy taking the snaps, I think that was really the hardest thing. But something that is now as a skill. It's like seeing people work with their hands or seeing people do a task. It's like, okay, I can understand how to do that without ever having done it myself.
Yeah. Because I think, Andrew, part of the progression of getting better at anything, quarterbacking included, is you got to be around people that are better than you.
Absolutely.
So, and that's not a knock against anybody. Like it's not a shame, a shameful thing to be the backup or the second, third string quarterback for the Grey Cup runner-up. That means that's a pretty high level.
Yeah.
But there was. I want to talk about this guy. So the guy who was number one on that Calgary Stampeder team, Bo Levi Mitchell, still tearing it up to this day. He's headed for the CFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Again, Andrew, from the point of view of trying to articulate, if at all possible, what makes a great quarterback, what was Bo Levi Mitchell doing that made him better than you that year? Keeping in mind, you, great quarterback.
Yeah.
Two-time Heck Crichton. This guy knows how to play quarterback. But there's another guy named Bo Levi Mitchell who's a level or two above you. As I said, he'll be in the CFL Hall of Fame one day. So talk about that guy, Bo Levi Mitchell, and what he did to be such a good quarterback.
Again, really thought-provoking, and maybe not one that I've actually sat down and analyzed, but he was absolutely special when he got behind the center, and still is, in fact. And he was one of those guys that I don't know if I'll be able to pin it down to a single thing, but it was a combination of he understood the system really, really well. And so when I was standing behind him taking reps in practice and watching him and seeing how he progressed through the play, he was just so much faster than I was at the time. And so it was like, he'd be off of
his faster in what way?
Well, faster mentally. And so, as a quarterback, one of the things they talk about is all the read progression. So when you're dropping back with the ball, you'll have, up to 5 or 6 receivers running a route. And there's kind of this progression that you go through. So you look at, your first target, you look at your second target, onto your third and fourth. And really that largely determines how well a quarterback does, is how fast they can process through these and say, not a good option, good option, and get rid of the ball. And he was so good at that you could see him, even before he had the ball, he was off of his first target because the pre-snap read didn't look good. And then he had moved on to his second, but because the safety, for example, was shaded to that side, he was already on his third and his fourth read. And so he could go through that so quickly. And I think that is what has made him so good. And he's a guy who physically doesn't have a lot of the key attributes. He's not fast, he's not necessarily big, but he's got a hell of an arm, and mentally he's as sharp as they get. And then I think the intangible part is that he's got confidence that you couldn't believe. Like he's a guy that believes in himself, his teammates believe in him, and he's a good leader. So he's got the whole package in that sense.
We might be on to something here, Andrew. You and I, we might have uncovered something. That being, maybe like when you get to the elite levels, what makes the difference at that point is maybe less physical and more mental. The mental faculties become more important then. Because Bo Levi Mitchell, he's physically, compared to you at that time, you mentioned his arm. Was his arm better than yours? Could he throw the ball farther than you?
He probably had a stronger arm than I did. Yeah, and he's an accurate thrower. I can't knock him for that. So I'd say, if you're stacking it against each other, yeah, he probably did.
Such an interesting, complicated discussion, man. We could go on and on. But we do have to get to our second, Andrew, believe it or not, topic that we got to cover today. Before we finish your career as an active player, so you played for 2 seasons for Calgary. After the second year, where you played a little bit more than the first year, despite that is, Andrew, when you make the decision, I'm going to hang it up, I'm done my athletic career, and I'm going to pursue what we're going to talk about in the second half of our conversation here, medicine. However, I think just to put a bow on your athletic career, talk to us, Andrew, about that decision, leaving the hometown, Calgary Stampeders, to pursue med school.
Yeah, really, really tough decision, and I think ultimately what it came down to was like I had wanted to become a doctor and go the medical route longer than I ever wanted to play CFL football. And it kind of seemed like such a far off thing, the fact that, oh, maybe I could play in the CFL, but, I didn't think I was going to make the university team, and no chance I thought I was going to make it onto a pro team. And so these doors just kept opening and kept allowing me to play football. But then, once I had the chance and I kind of lived that dream, it was like, well, I've got the rest of my life to think about and time to, hunker down to something that's a bit more, career longevity and something that physically is a little easier on you. And so it just
Definitely
felt like the right time.
Not easy decision, I'm sure, though. But here we are. Now he's in medical school, and for the next 20 minutes or so, Andrew, I'd love to get your expertise on that area. Like I keep saying, folks, very few people, not many in the world, can talk about a athletic career on the football field plus a medical career like Andrew can. So I do want to get your insights into the medical stuff. And actually, you're still involved, Andrew, in football. You've combined two of your loves here, medicine with football. Talk about what you do these days from a medical point of view, not a QB point of view, at the University of Calgary.
Yeah, so this last year I've been working as a sport medicine doctor at the University of Calgary. So kind of combining a practice partly at Banff Sport Medicine and partly at University of Calgary Sport Medicine. So I function as we call it a GP specialist, where all I do is sport medicine. So dealing with the MSK injuries, dealing with chronic musculoskeletal conditions like osteoarthritis and low back pains, things like that. But then as a part of the role with the University of Calgary, we get to cover and manage the health of all the varsity athletes. So I'm able to...
So cool.
Able to look after the varsity football team, varsity wrestlers, some hockey players, rugby players, track and field, and basically keep these people who are so physically active in kind of a dangerous, aggressive contact sports. Try to keep them healthy, keep them on the field, and at the end of the day, just help them have successful seasons. So it's a bit of a full circle job for me to be able to give back in that way.
Fantastic. All right, let's keep it football specific here and talk about what you do with the dinos. What stuff might be important to you from a medical point of view in keeping football players healthy? And I got three topics, Andrew, that maybe we'll try to fit in here. One, preseason. What are you looking at for these people? Number two, we'll talk about some of the in-season injuries, just stuff that's interesting, maybe position by position. And then of course, everyone wants to talk about concussions these days. So maybe we'll talk about each of these three topics. First one's talking about the preseason. Take us behind the scenes and what, from a medical point of view, Andrew, is interesting to look at for football players.
Yeah, so very multifaceted with how we can have an impact as the team doctor. And it is a small impact, but the things you do can have big significance. And so preseason, there's a couple of key things that we look at, and all of the returning players or the veteran players on the team, largely most of them have some sort of injury history from the year before, whether it's sprained ankles, torn knees, surgeries, concussions. And so it's kind of tying up the loose ends with those injuries, making sure that, hey, are they strong enough to get back on the field? Are they safe to get back and play a season of football again? And if they're not, how can we address those things to get them on the field come training camp? Preseason, there's a lot of other important sort of health things that take place as well. And it's a chance where it's a point of medical contact for us with athletes who sometimes don't have a lot of medical contact. So, we're making sure things like vaccinations are up to date. We're, in the sport world, there's a big push for the physicians to be in charge of sort of the doping in the safe sport world, where, you want to outline, hey, be cautious about what you're putting into your body from a supplement standard. There's lots of tainted supplements that could test positive on a drug test, things like that. So we're giving them resources and basically making sure they're safe with substances that go into the body so that they don't flag a positive test. Doing all sorts of things in terms of concussion history, because that's something that, the more concussions you get as a varsity athlete, it's got a big impact on your career. And so we want to make sure those are carefully documented and make sure that there's no lingering effects from past concussions, things like that. So it turns into a point in time for us where we can get a thorough understanding of each athlete on the roster to make sure that, should something happen in the season, we're the ones that know, as much as we possibly can about these athletes.
Yeah, so interesting. Um, do you or does someone else on the staff look at, we'll call it body composition / body weight? We talked about body weight earlier as being kind of a relevant thing for a lot of the positions in football, and relatedly, body composition. Do you handle the anthropometry, or is someone else doing that?
No, it's not necessarily us doing it. We certainly record it from the medical side of things, more to see, okay, how are things changing in time? But, I can't think of a time where we've had to act on that in football anyways. There's other sports that we manage where it becomes a bit more of a red flag for us to look at, and, things like that are more the weight-based sports. So things like the track and field team, the wrestling team, where there's a big emphasis, okay, we need to be lighter and faster, or we need to cut weight. Because then if we're seeing big trends with the body weight getting too low, that can be a pretty significant determinant of long-term health. And so we take those pretty seriously. But football, it's, we largely more sit back and kind of watch the trends as first-year linemen get up to their playing weights, and it can be dramatic, but we haven't had to act on those necessarily.
Yeah. Blood work?
Yeah, we don't routinely order like a screening blood work panel, but we will order it if there's a good medical indication. And so if, for example, if a player has, a history of iron deficient anemia, we can do that to track it serially over time. Or, if there's a player with some sort of, say a thyroid condition, we can track that, but only if they've got a medical reason, because we know that if you go looking for things, you'll end up finding things that aren't necessarily
Absolutely.
a problem. So we say, well, until they present as disease, we don't necessarily have to worry about them.
Yeah. Okay, great stuff, man. Let's keep moving forward here. Talk about in-season injuries and just whatever kind of comes to mind. How about we do it this way, Andrew? I'll name a position, and you talk about some injuries that you see commonly or should be of concern for physicians. And of course, we got to start with our subject matter at hand, and we'll save concussions to the end. Their
Sure.
own little spiel. But the quarterback, what kind of in-season injuries are these guys susceptible to?
Yeah, so early on, these would be guys that are getting a lot of overuse injuries, particularly at the shoulder, elbow, wrist, because it's a good indicator of how much they've been training in the off season, because usually on day one of training camp, you're throwing 500 footballs a day. And so the guys that have been training their arm to handle that capacity, they do fine. But the guys that you can tell haven't been putting in the time in the off season, they get overuse rotator cuff injuries, they get elbow UCL strains or stress injuries. So that would be kind of the big one for quarterbacks. And then more game type of thing, you see a lot of knee injuries in the quarterback position when they're basically standing in the pocket looking downfield, and someone from the line gets rolls into their knee or ankle and basically just twists a knee that's been planted. So those would be kind of the two that really jump to mind with the quarterback.
And speaking of the first one you just mentioned, because of course the arm is the key thing for the quarterback. Earlier, Andrew, I asked you about like the off-field training, okay, in general, and we talked about number of days per week going to the gym and whatnot. Is there any value in, let's call it prehabbing the quarterback arm? Namely, so never mind being injured in these structures you're talking about, rotator cuff or elbow or whatever the case may be. Yes or no? There's value in like undertaking a training regime to prehab the arm for the quarterback.
Yes, absolutely.
So what kind of things are you talking about?
It's all of the stuff that work on the the rotational muscles of the shoulder, and then the muscles that can essentially handle the basically elbow flexors and extensors to support the elbow joint. And looking back at it now, as a quarterback, I was doing all of the same stuff, like probably 2, 3, 4 times a week, all of the same stuff in the gym that I now give the patients I see with rotator cuff tears and post shoulder surgery. So it's all of the same stuff designed to bulk up the muscles that support the joint, because it's a joint that has so much mobility, but one that
Yeah, yeah.
demands a lot of strength when you're using a high velocity movement. So you really need muscles that are going to support that joint with so much mobility.
And these aren't the sexiest things to do in the gym, eh? These are,
No, no, these are not the ones that attract attention. They're the slow, boring, banded rotational exercises. It's doing all like basically every plane of motion that you can, trying to bulk up those rotator cuff muscles. There's kind of a new progression. You see it a lot in baseball pitchers too, where they're doing a lot of sort of fast, ballistic, eccentric type of movements to bulk up those muscles. So it is pretty thorough, and you could have an entire specialty devoted to a thrower's shoulder. My philosophy is that I think you can, by training these muscles, increase the threshold before you hit overuse. I think that would be what I would suggest. And absolutely, I've had those coaches that are like, I don't care whether you lift weights or not, just friggin' chuck the football. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. There's guys that don't touch a weight in the off season and they throw and have no problems. But I think looking broadly, if you were to have a guy be doing all of those sort of prehabilitation type of exercises, probably your tissue capacity is going to be greater before you reach the injury threshold, would be my thought.
yeah, it's so complicated, so intricate. And would these be quarterback specific exercises, meaning like he's the only guy really throwing the ball? Linemen, receivers, running back, they're not doing that type of a program?
Typically not. No, when I look back at my time in the gym, I was the only guy doing that sort of thing, unless there had been, a lineman that had been rehabbing a shoulder surgery. They would go through the same protocols, but very specific, yeah.
All right, let's just go through some other positions real quick. Linemen, what kind of injuries are they looking at, Andrew?
Linemen get a ton of hand and finger injuries. Like they're always, punching and grabbing and twisting, and they get fingers caught in jerseys. So they get a ton of little finger injuries, whether that's dislocations or, avulsions. That would be a very common one. The typical sort of overuse injury for a lineman, they get these things called spondylosis or spondylolisthesis, where when they're catching and trying to block, they end up in this position where their spine is kind of bent backwards in an extended position, which can put a ton of stress through different parts of the vertebrae and actually give stress fractures in the vertebrae. So it's something it's one of those things not to miss when you hear a lineman with back pain.
Yeah.
So that would be one. And then, the classic for those big guys, unfortunately, is the knee injuries, where they're just in such a massive, big, heavy, fast-moving people that when someone falls and takes out a knee, it ends up often being, an ACL injury or an MCL injury. So always got to be careful with the ligaments in those guys.
Would you say that's the most physical of the? It's a physical sport. We talked about this. There's no getting around that. Is that the one, Andrew, that has the most physicality?
I think the most consistent physicality, yeah. Like you can see the linebackers, like they're often doing the highest volume of heavy impact, but the linemen play in, play out, they're making contact and they're having to initiate a fight every single play. So, yeah. I would say so.
One last position group. Let's put them together. Receivers / DBs.
I think the big injuries you see there, as more of a sprinting position, kind of high speed planting, pivoting, like you see a ton of early in training camp, like the hamstring strains and hamstring tears. You'd often see a fair bit of shoulder injuries, where if you're going to dive for a ball, you can get dislocations in the shoulder. So those would be kind of two that would come to mind for those positions.
Okay, and the final thing to talk about, and maybe I'll just throw it to you very, very openly, very broadly, for you to talk about the topic of concussions in football here in the year 2025. What comes to mind?
Yeah, it's obviously a hot topic, and I think there was that big film in the Will Smith movie Concussion that came out that sort of started people thinking about it, and you can see it's been a problem really since football initiated the helmet and started leading with the head and emphasizing the big hits. And I remember growing up that it wasn't really talked about for me until I got to about first or second year university. It was sort of like, well, yeah, of course you're going to lead with your head and go in there and try and make a big hit. But
they would coach that way. And again, for context,
yeah.
This is 2012.
Yeah, 2010, 2011, kind of around there. It was still like we didn't really think much of it. But I do remember a distinct turn in how things started like how the coaches started coaching tackling drills and hitting drills, and how to initiate contact. And I think I was kind of going through still playing at the time that was coming out. And then even a shift to how practices were held, where it's like, okay, we have to now limit how many days of contact we can have in practice. My first couple of years with the Dinos, training camps were just like, yeah, we're going to put on pads every single day and you're going to hit heads every day, and that's how you get ready for the games. And then by my fifth year, it was like, yeah, we'd maybe wear pads once or twice a week in practice and save the contact for the games. It's just a way to kind of lower your overall pitch count as far as head contacts. So it was, kind of a big change for when I was in there. It was kind of around the same time too that in the CFL, the CFL Players Association was making a big push for like no contact practices as a way to mitigate head injury.
Wow.
So kind of cool to be a part of that generational change when I was playing, for sure. But a huge issue, no doubt, and one that I think we still haven't maybe seen the full fallout from it yet. There's terrible case studies with very specific NFL athletes that have, had a long storied NFL career that then it kind of spirals into the post-concussion syndrome and the CTE syndrome, basically, and then they end up with, kind of the life falling to pieces, and some of them commit suicide and have their families fall apart. And like, it's so sad to see for the sake of playing football. And so I think now that we're aware of it, I think that's the first step for trying to basically prevent it so that never happens again, and we're moving in the right direction.
Is there standard diagnostic criteria for a concussion?
That's the hardest part about it, is that right now there's no single blood test you could do. There's no single imaging scan that will diagnose it. So, unlike so many medical conditions where we can look at an x-ray and say, yep, that bone is broken, concussion is not like that, where you're really largely basing it on the symptoms that are presented in front of you. You can, it's the value of the team doctor for the team being eyes on watching the game, so you can see the head impacts as they happen, and then see how the symptoms unfold with the player on the field. And then there are tools that help diagnose a concussion. So there's basically a patient survey called the SCAT that is designed to kind of be a concussion symptom tool. So you can say, okay, based on the symptoms that you feel, whether it's headache, light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, mood disturbance, you can kind of compile all these symptoms and put together a score saying it's likely that you've had a concussion, but there's no one tool that will say you've had it.
Yeah. And let's get into some more of the anecdotes here, because it's not my area of expertise, but it seems like they vary in their severity to different people. So, for example, you talk about these old timers who, the rule of thumb, Andrew, was you get your bell rung, get back out there, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
But some of these other athletes who are just totally debilitated by a concussion, like I'm thinking of hockey players that I've heard stories. Pat LaFontaine, I read recently, he couldn't move, Andrew. He's in a dark room with no lights for days, and he can't have any contact with anything, basically. I mean, if it's that severe, there's no saying, oh, you got your bell rung, get back out there. The man physically can't move, for goodness sake, with his concussion. But on the other hand, I've heard stories of if you get knocked out, if the lights get turned out, then that was technically a concussion. Use myself as an example here. I've had a concussion for sure, at least one, but I've been knocked out before, Andrew, and I was playing football, actually. Flag football. I did a spin move. My buddy at Lakehead University tried to tackle me, and we smashed heads. And next thing I remember is one of the girls yelling, "There's blood! There's blood!" And I'm thinking, I don't know how I got on the ground, and there's blood. What's happening here? But anyway, I never had a symptom, Andrew.
Yeah.
Like before, during, after, no pain of any kind really, but I was certainly unconscious.
Yeah.
I'm stealing your medical expertise here to apply it for myself, but maybe it might be useful to just to put it in perspective. If that situation happened to someone, and you're the consulting physician, if a dyno had happened to him what happened to me, Your lights are turned out. You get a few stitches, but I feel fine. How is that treated? Was it a concussion?
Yeah, it's a great question, and because they're so variable in how they present, and then the symptom followed afterwards, it becomes a really difficult condition or injury to treat. And so we would treat that generally as a concussion because there's a head impact, a loss of consciousness, maybe short-term symptoms there afterwards. But then the safe thing that we're starting to do is to just initiate the concussion protocol with that. And so we say, well, we don't have any physical or biological metric that we can say for sure that was a concussion. So we say, well, we're going to play the safe card and we're going to treat it as if it were a concussion. And so essentially we start you through this concussion protocol that starts off with 24, 48 hours of basically you just kind of brain rest, they call it. And it doesn't need to be sitting in a dark room necessarily, but it's limiting the activities that are going to stress the brain or things that would essentially limit the brain's capacity to heal. So in the same way, if you tear a hamstring, you're not going to start running the next day. You want to do the same for your brain and just give it this day or two to calm down, kind of hit a new baseline. And then shortly thereafter, we'd kind of get you into the physical part of the protocol, where after the first couple of days, we're now starting to say that early physical activity is actually good for rehabilitation from a concussion. And so we start off with things like we essentially do a heart rate stress test. And so the first step is to say, okay, once you're at a low level of symptoms or you're unchanging in your symptoms, we can put you now on an exercise bike and we can get your heart rate up to a certain threshold and see how your symptoms change. And if we get you up to, I think the first baseline is about 55% of your predicted heart rate max. If we can get you up to that point and you don't have any worsening of symptoms, then we can say, okay, we're safe to move on to the next phase of the protocol. And so then the next day, you'd stress the heart out a little bit more. And once you can go through that, then we can then get you onto the field and start doing some cutting drills. But we basically determine how fast you move through it based on your symptoms. So if you're able to clear every step of this course without having a worsening of symptoms and no new symptoms from prior to the incident, we can say, well, based on our current knowledge, based on the research and the the Canadian concussion guidelines, you're safe, or as safe as we can possibly make it to get back on the field.
Andrew, that was as good of a synopsis of concussion protocol treatment in 4 minutes than I could ever have hoped to have heard.
I hope it was okay.
One last question for you. We'll end the concussion topic on, I suppose, a philosophical note. Tua Tagovailoa, you see this guy with a horrific kind of incidents happening on the field, but he still is playing football to this day. Can you kind of rationalize or justify that type of decision with your background as having done both, a quarterback who wants to play the game but a medical doctor? What would you say about the Tua situation?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I talk about it often with my dad. He's also a physician, and we have debates and arguments about him. I think personally there would have to be a lot on the line for me to get back on the field, and I think the complicating factor for him is that he's doing it for millions and millions of dollars. And if he were playing for free, would he still be out there taking head contacts? I think it would probably be a different case. But the fact that there's so much money and there's such a big juicy carrot at the end of that, it would be hard to turn that down. And hard to say what sort of family influence there is if he's supporting, grandparents, parents, friends, siblings, whatever. But I think looking just at his health, he is very high risk for just long-term disease from having had so many big significant concussions. And you can see that each one he has, it seems to be a lower type of impact or torsional force that gives him a concussion, and then often his recovery is now becoming longer. And who knows what he's dealing with day to day in terms of symptoms, if any. But he's in a tough spot.
Yeah, interesting. Everything you've said, Andrew, has been interesting. We talked about the nuances of playing the quarterback position, and we talked about your expertise as a medical doctor. Thanks so much, man, for sharing your expertise. Now, before we go, though, Andrew, do you have a few minutes left to play everybody's favorite game show, 10 Questions?
Absolutely.
I think we can still learn some things about quarterbacking and football in general by playing 10 questions here with Andrew Buckley. So, Andrew, thanks for volunteering to play. All right. Very simple. I'll ask you 10 questions. You just give me a short answer off the top of your head, whatever comes to mind. And question number 1, Andrew, is when was the last time you wore a cowboy hat?
I guess in Calgary we've got the wonderful Calgary Stampede, which is the first week of July every summer. So it would be probably about July 7th of 2025. It's
not long ago.
Exactly. Sinful to go without a cowboy hat there.
Look, I'm going to ask a sub question. I've heard a rumor. You're a very good man to verify this. That if you're not actually, that you shouldn't wear a cowboy hat if you're not legit. You might get your butt kicked for doing that. Is that any truth to that, or can anyone just wear a cowboy hat? You
probably put a target on your back, but I think it's easy to tell who's wearing it and who knows how to wear it. So I think it's you can pick apart the pretenders real quick.
I guess so. Okay, question number 2. Andrew, who is your favorite all-time Calgary Flame?
Ooh, I think Jerome McGinley. He was a guy I grew up watching. It was kind of like my youth sport, and he had that Stanley Cup run in 2004 that I still think about. So it's got to be Jerome McGinley.
I think all Calgarians think about that.
Yeah.
He could have been a good football player too, Jerome McGinley.
I think so too, yeah.
Question number 3. Let's get back to the university days. What was the hardest course you ever took in university?
Oh, I took it would probably have to be biochemistry. Just in order to get into med school, there was a certain number of prerequisites, and biochemistry was one of them, and I hated every second of it. But I think
hang on, what, like a certain branch of biochemistry? Was it just called biochemistry?
I think it was just the introductory biochemistry, and I didn't have.
And that was your hardest course.
Oh yeah, I struggled with that one. It was just didn't come natural to me, and I remember having to put in so much extra time and effort just to scrape through that one. I just hear the word and I cringe to this day.
Yet here you are.
Made it. You just survived that hurdle, and then away you go. So.
All right, 2 more about university. This is about all-nighters, studying all-nighters. Is there a minimum number of hours of sleep that are required for you before you could go and write an exam the next day?
Oh, I would have been minimum 6 to 8 probably, and only because my mindset was that I'm probably better to go to sleep, get a good night's rest, than I am to cram in and keep studying. That was my philosophy.
Really, Andrew?
Yeah, and I think because...
So you didn't do the all-nighters?
No, never did, and I made it a habit that I never felt urgency to study for a test because I had been, putting in the time and prep before that. And so I never felt like I was unprepared. Like I'd been studying for weeks before each test. And so I was like, well, an extra couple of hours versus getting a good night's rest, easy choice.
Hear that, students? Andrew, if I may add, Andrew, listen, to each his own. I was the exact opposite, man.
Oh, yeah.
I thought if there was minutes left before this test started, I could learn something. I can learn something.
Yeah.
Anyway, different minds. That's all.
Yeah. Some people need that pressure to kind of light the fire, and I would just get her done ahead of time.
You did it the right way. You got it done ahead of time.
Well, right or wrong, there's lots of people that make it through the all-nighters, and they do okay.
Okay, question number 5. This is going to be a good question because many of my students, Andrew, have aspirations of going to med school. Okay, and the course is about nutrition, athletics, performance, and behavior that I teach these prospective med students in. So they're also interested in sports medicine. So if you could just give a quick summary advice for people that are leaning towards that particular discipline. How do you become a sports medicine doctor?
Yeah, so very simply, like if I'm going back to the application process to undergo the sport medicine training, they look at a couple of big things. And so it's, do you have personal sporting background? Have you played high school sports, university sports, whatever? That's a factor. Have you done some sort of leadership in sports, so things like coaching or teaching or mentorship to younger generations? as you go higher up, there's opportunities to do research. And so if you've done any sort of medical research, or even, I've got a friend now kind of going down the same path, and he's doing concussion research. So that's something that will kind of lend weight to like a sport medicine route. And then at the very baseline, it's just a passion for sport. Like that was the first question I was asked on all of my sport medicine interviews was, tell us what you love about sport and why you want to do this. And I think if you're someone who's keen and willing to stand in the rain to be a sport medicine doctor on the side of some high school football game somewhere, that's a good enough answer.
That's a great piece of advice. All right, let's shift gears again here. Question number 6. This is a multiple choice question, Andrew. You ready? I'm going to give you five possibilities. You tell me who you're taking, okay? Among these great Alberta musicians, tell me who you're taking. A, Nickelback. B, Joni Mitchell. C, Paul Brandt. D, Tate McRae. E, someone not on this list.
Nickelback, 100% of the time. They get a bad rap, but they are good.
I'm a fan of a few Nickelback songs. I'll go along with that.
Maybe a little aside story about Nickelback. Sorry, I know we're pressed for time, but our Nickelback is from Hanna, Alberta, and our my university coach Blake Nill was also from Hanna, so he always used to joke that he was the most famous person from Hanna aside from Nickelback. So funny anyways.
I knew they were from Hanna. Also from Hanna, Alberta, Lanny McDonald, I believe. Am I correct on that?
I did not know that.
I think that's true. We could look it up later. Anyway, question number 7, another musical question. What was your go-to pre-game song?
Pre-game song. So I was very superstitious when I was playing, actually. I had a playlist that had 5 songs that I had to listen to in the same order. But it's been so long now since I've gone through those. Oh gosh. If I can think of one. I can't give you
5 songs.
Sorry, favorite 5 songs?
No, it was the same 5 songs.
Exactly, it was the same 5 songs in very different genres, but they were each one that would stir up a different emotion in me. And one of them was Zach Brown Chicken Fried.
Really?
I don't know how or why that was on there, but it was important.
Kind of a mellow song. You can mellow you out before the game. It's okay.
Yeah.
All right, next one. I know you're going to have I've been waiting to ask you this, actually. Oh, by the way, this is the get to know the athlete. I'll divulge to the listener some of the banter that Andrew and I had in emails back and forth setting this up. He's a very busy man, as you might guess. He's a medical doctor, and he had all these other things happening in September, one of which was the start of hunting season. So I know you'll have an answer. I'm very interested to see what you're going to say to this. What is, Andrew, the tastiest wild game animal?
I think my favorite large game would be elk, but the best fresh wild game I had was actually wild boar from Saskatchewan. It was actually a bachelor party hunting trip I went on out there, and believe it or not, we were out there hunting wild boar in the woods of Saskatchewan, and it was one of the best meals I've ever had.
Wild boar, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's I have to try it. I never had it.
It is worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Elk is big in Alberta, is that right? That's the main thing you hunt out there?
Yeah, a lot of elk, a lot of whitetail, and then depending on the zone, there's a fair bit of moose too, but certainly not East Coast moose.
No, that's what I told you was our thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we could talk about hunting for another hour and a half. Anyway, question number 9. I almost left this out, but I had to squeeze it in here. Every athlete gets asked this, Andrew. What is your personal best all-time 1-rep max bench press?
Ooh, I think I was about 325, something like that. I was never a huge bench presser compared to some of the guys, but I was pretty proud of that one.
325, that's the answer. And the 10th and final question in 10 questions. Let's tie it back to quarterbacking. We mentioned, Andrew, one of your former teammate, Bo Levi Mitchell, one of the all-time greats. You had another guy we didn't come up yet, but your coach in the CFL, Dave Dickinson, another Hall of Famer. Is there something that you took from him about playing the position of quarterback?
I think the biggest thing I learned from him was that when you look at the guy, if you saw a lineup of 100 people on the street, he'd be the least likely that you would say would be a professional quarterback, let alone a Hall of Famer, because he's small, not very fast, and kind of just a wiry little guy. And so I think he taught me how to be successful at the position as someone who was, quote, undersized. And I remember we had season tickets growing up watching him, and he was a guy that, despite being 5'10" maybe, he could get in there, he could lead the offense, and he did it with this instead of the physical side of things. So yeah, he was an amazing mentor.
Themes that came up in the last 90 minutes of us having this wonderful chat, Andrew. So that is a great way to end this. I'll just say one last time, thank you for giving us this time here this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out. This has been awesome.
And on that note, I will sign off in the way that I always sign off, by saying, let's go Canada. Support Canadian athletes.
Love it.